My partner crazy got killed in our
Who?
Man.
Yeah. So your partner got killed over here?
Yeah, long little crazy.
Oh, okay.
Good coward ass nigga snaking my dog. You see what I'm saying?
I mean, what happened? They just came up in here and just like a incident happened?
Yeah, we ain't gonna speak on that though.
Oh, okay.
Let's talk about the ghetto. Not as slang, not as an insult, not as an aesthetic. In the most literal sense, a ghetto is a place where a specific group of people is forced or restricted to live. It is not defined by behavior. It is defined by boundaries. Physical boundaries, economic boundaries, social boundaries. A ghetto exists when access is limited by design, when movement is controlled, when opportunity is unevenly distributed. Now let's talk about the word itself. The term ghetto did not begin as an insult. It originated in Europe, used to describe neighborhoods where Jewish populations were required to live, often by law. These areas were marked, gated, monitored, and separated from the rest of the city. People could work outside them during the day, but had to return at night. The purpose was not culture, it was control. Over time, the word ghetto became associated not just with the place, but with the conditions inside it. Crowding, underinvestment, surveillance, limited opportunity. As the term traveled across countries and centuries, its meaning expanded, but its function stayed the same. A ghetto always describes a population that has been contained, not one that chose confinement. That distinction matters, because once the word stopped describing a place and started describing people, the responsibility quietly shifted. Systems disappeared from the conversation, and individuals became the blame. But in its truest definition, the ghetto is not a mindset. It is a location shaped by power, a condition created, not a character flaw inherited. And if we don't understand that, everything else we say about the ghetto will be built on a lie.
Let's talk about where the ghetto began in the United States, because this story does not start with crime. It starts with neighborhoods. Many of the areas we now call the ghetto were once working-class white neighborhoods. Factories were nearby, ports, railroads, warehouses. People lived close to work. Life was modest but stable. Then America changed. As industries expanded, jobs began opening their doors to more people of color. Black families moved closer to opportunity. Immigrant families did the same. And that's when white flight began. White families moved outward to newly built suburbs, backed by government loans and incentives that were not offered to everyone. As they left, money left with them. Property taxes dropped, and with them, school funding, parks, libraries, recreation centers. Education and opportunity became tied to zip codes. Then the jobs started to disappear. Factories moved overseas, plants closed, ports automated. What remained was unemployment, concentrated in the same neighborhoods that had already been divested. With fewer jobs and fewer resources, crime increased, not because people became worse, but because survival became harder. Then came the crack epidemic. Drugs flooded communities already stripped of opportunity. Addiction rose, families fractured, and instead of treatment or investment, the response was punishment. Over-policing followed. Entire neighborhoods placed under surveillance, harsh sentencing laws, stop and frisk, mandatory minimums. Children grew up surrounded by cages instead of counselors. Then came systems meant to protect that often did more harm than good. Families broken apart. Children moved through foster systems that fed quiet trafficking pipelines. Meanwhile, corrupt politicians fed off the decay. Funds were misused, promises were recycled, communities were studied but never truly repaired. Property values collapsed, businesses closed, hope thinned out. The ghetto was no longer just neglected, it was devalued. And then, in the 1020s, something changed again. Suddenly, the land was valuable. Developers arrived, rent increased, homes were flipped, people were pushed out. What was once called dangerous was rebranded as up and coming. The same neighborhoods, different residents. This is the full timeline. Movement in, flight out, divestment, criminalization, extraction, and finally, replacement. The American ghetto was not created by chaos. It was shaped, maintained, and later harvested. And understanding that changes how we talk about everything else.
Let's talk about the projects, because the projects were never meant to be what they became. Public housing in the United States began as a solution. During and after World War II, the government needed housing for returning veterans and working families. The goal was stability, affordable homes, dignity. Early public housing was often well-maintained, intentionally integrated, and located near jobs and transportation. But as time passed, the mission changed. White veterans were gradually moved out through home ownership programs and suburban expansion. Those same doors were not opened equally to everyone else. Public housing began absorbing the people the rest of the housing market rejected. Black families, disabled residents, single mothers, immigrants, the poorest of the poor. Instead of being one option among many, the projects became the last option. Funding was cut, maintenance declined, promises faded. High-rise designs replaced human-scale neighborhoods, concentrating thousands of people with few resources into a small amount of space. Jobs were already disappearing, schools were underfunded, recreation vanished. What had once been housing became containment. The projects were then labeled high crime without acknowledging how crime follows abandonment. Police replaced social workers, surveillance replaced support. Generations grew up inside systems designed to manage poverty, not end it. By the late 20th century, the narrative was set. The projects were portrayed as failures, but the failure was never the people, it was the design. Then came demolition. Projects were torn down in the name of revitalization. Residents were displaced, communities scattered, support networks dissolved. Some families received vouchers, many received nothing. The land was cleared, the memory was erased. What replaced the projects was rarely built for the people who lived there. And today, the story is often told as if the projects simply failed. But the truth is simpler. Public housing did not collapse on its own. It was redirected, underfunded, and abandoned by policy. The projects show us something important. When housing is treated as containment instead of care, it will always break. And when it breaks, the blame is placed on the people inside it. That is not history. That is design. Let's talk about what happened next, because the story of the ghetto is often told as if crime appeared out of nowhere. It didn't. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, many urban communities were already under pressure. Jobs were gone, schools were underfunded, housing was deteriorating. Then crack cocaine arrived, not evenly, not randomly. It flooded communities already stripped of resources and opportunity. The drug moved fast, it was cheap, highly addictive, and devastating. Addiction spread, families destabilized, informal economies grew because formal ones no longer existed. Violence followed, not because people suddenly became violent, but because unregulated markets and desperation collide. The response was not investment, it was punishment. The war on drugs began. Mandatory minimum sentences, 3 strikes laws, stop and frisk, no-knock raids. Entire neighborhoods were treated as criminal zones. Policing increased, but services did not. Treatment centers were rare. Mental health support was minimal. Education funding continued to fall. Prisons expanded. Families fractured. Children grew up visiting loved ones behind glass. A criminal record became a life sentence. It limited employment, housing access, voting rights. Meanwhile, politicians ran on law and order platforms while communities paid the price. Corruption thrived in the shadows. Federal funds disappeared. Local contracts were mishandled. Promises were recycled every election cycle. And as conditions worsened, media narratives hardened. The ghetto was framed as dangerous, hopeless, beyond saving. That framing justified everything that followed. More police, harsher laws, less investment. By the time the crack era began to fade, the damage was already generational. Mass incarceration had reshaped entire family trees. The ghetto had been criminalized, not because of inherent behavior, but because punishment replaced policy repair. And once a place is labeled criminal, everything inside it becomes disposable. That is how containment turns into cages, and that is how history gets rewritten to blame the people who survived it.
Let's talk about how the ghetto shaped culture and how that culture is being misused right now. Because what people call cool didn't fall from the sky. It was built in places that were underfunded, over-policed, and constantly judged. The ghetto didn't create culture for fun. It created culture because people had to make meaning inside conditions that were designed to break them. When you don't have access, you develop style. When you're not heard, you develop language. When you're boxed in, you turn the box into a stage. That's how the blueprint got made. Music wasn't just entertainment. It was testimony. It was neighborhood news. It was grief, survival, and pride all in the same breath. Fashion wasn't just clothes. It was status without wealth. It was armor. It was a way to look powerful in a world that kept trying to make you invisible. Slang wasn't improper English. It was code. Humor wasn't random. It was relief. It was a pressure valve. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. In today's society, everybody wants a piece of that, especially people who never had to live the conditions that produced it. Rich people, suburban people, non-black people, institutions, brands, executives, influences. They don't just appreciate it, they want to buy their way into it. They want to wear it, talk like it, move like it, and profit from it without paying respect to what it costs to create. That's not love, that's extraction. And it happens in layers. First, they criminalize it while it's still ours. They call it thugs. They call it ratchet. They call it ghetto like it's a disease. They call the music dangerous, the clothes suspicious, the hair unprofessional, the slang uneducated. Then when it becomes profitable, the exact same things get rebranded. Suddenly it's street, suddenly it's urban, suddenly it's edgy, suddenly it's drip, suddenly it's cool. Same culture, different marketing. And then comes the biggest flip of all, ownership. Streetwear is a perfect example. Streetwear didn't start in boardrooms, it started in neighborhoods, it started in youth culture, it started in skate culture, hip-hop, corner stores, mixtapes, barbershops, and small brands built by people close to the ground. But what do we see now? Many streetwear brands are not owned by the community that created the aesthetic. They get bought, they get packaged, they get scales. Private equity comes in, pours money on it, cleans it up for mass consumption, and sells it back to the world at a premium. The style becomes a product line. The struggle becomes a logo. The neighborhood becomes a vibe. And the people who created it, they stay right where they are unless they're pushed out. That's the pattern. It's not just fashion, it's language, it's music, it's dance, it's food, it's the entire ghetto imagination being mined like a resource. And it's personal too, because now you have people who don't share the history trying to cosplay the identity. You see kids from safe suburbs performing trauma online like it's a personality trait. You see people adopting accents and slang like costumes. You see influences turning hood into content while being terrified of the actual hood. They want the sauce, not the stove. They want the rhythm, not the reality. They want the culture, not the consequences. And then there's the cruelest part. When the culture is separated from the people become disposable. The same society that copies the style refuses to invest in the neighborhoods. The same society that dances to the music supports policies that keep the communities underfunded. The same society that buys streetwear treats the people wearing it like threats in real life. So the question isn't whether the ghetto shaped culture. It did. The question is, why is the world so comfortable consuming the product but allergic to repairing the source? Because if we're being honest, what's happening is colonization in modern form. Not land first, culture first. They take the symbols, sell the identity, and leave the conditions untouched. So let's name it clearly. When culture is taken without context, that's not appreciation, that's consumption. When culture is copied and sold back to the world, that's not admiration, that's extraction. When people use the ghetto as an aesthetic while disrespecting the people inside it, that's not being down, that's theft with a smile. And if we're going to talk about cool, we got to talk about cost. Because the ghetto didn't just create culture, it created the foundation of modern popular culture, and the world has been flipping it for profit ever since.
Let's talk about gentrification, because it's usually sold as progress, as renewal, as opportunity. But for the people who live through it, gentrification often feels less like improvement and more like eviction with better marketing. By the time gentrification begins, a neighborhood has already been through decades of neglect. Jobs left, schools underfunded, buildings decayed, services stripped. The area is labeled dangerous, undesirable, and broken. That neglect is not accidental. It creates devaluation. And once land is cheap enough, attention suddenly returns. Developers arrive, investors follow. City councils start using words like revitalization, redevelopment, and urban renewal. Streets get repaved, cafes open, art appears, rents rise. But here's the key question. Who is the neighborhood being revived for? Because the people who survive the worst years are rarely the ones who benefit. Property taxes increase, rent jumps, long-time residents are priced out. Homeowners struggle to keep up. Renters are pushed out entirely. What couldn't be afforded for decades suddenly becomes prime real estate. And the same culture that was once mocked or criminalized is now used as a selling point. Murals inspired by Black pain, music curated from the neighborhood sound, slang and aesthetics repackaged as authentic urban flavor. The struggle becomes ambiance. History is flattened into decor. The neighborhood gets safer not because the people were unsafe, but because the people are being replaced. This is where the myth lives. Gentrification is framed as fixing a place, but places don't fail on their own. They're starved, then they're sold. What's called revitalization is often just reinvestment without reparative justice. The infrastructure improves, but the community is displaced. The area becomes walkable, but not affordable. The schools improve, but the children who grew up there can't attend them. And then comes the final insult. Once the original residents are gone, the narrative changes. The neighborhood is described as finally reaching its potential, as if the people who lived there for generations were the problem, as if potential only exists once Black and poor bodies are removed. This is not renewal, it is replacement. It is extraction at the land level, just like culture was extracted earlier. First, they devalue the people,
Then they devalue the place, and they buy it cheap, then they flip it, then they rewrite the story. And if you don't understand that pattern, gentrification looks like progress. But if you do understand it, you see it clearly. Gentrification doesn't ask how to repair communities, it asks how to rebrand them. And until investment comes without displacement and improvement comes without erasure, this cycle will continue. Because what's being rebuilt is not community, it's profit.
Let's talk about where we are now. Because the story didn't end in the past, it's still unfolding. In the early 2010s, the shift became visible. Neighborhoods that had been ignored for decades were suddenly labeled up and coming. Investors moved in faster than residents could adapt. Rents rose, property taxes spiked, long-time families were displaced. Gentrification accelerated under the language of progress. By the mid-2010s, technology sped everything up. Short-term rentals replaced long-term neighbors. Algorithms decided which areas were worth saving. Data, not people, began shaping cities. Culture was fully commodified. Land was fully financialized. Then came the 2020s. A pandemic exposed everything. Essential workers were suddenly visible but still disposable. Housing insecurity exploded. Evictions surged. Mutual aid filled gaps left by institutions. People realized what communities had been saying all along. Survival had been outsourced to the people with the least support. At the same time, surveillance increased. Policing expanded digitally, social services shrank, cities doubled down on control instead of care. Now here we are, at a crossroads. One path leads to deeper extraction, smarter displacement, cleaner language hiding the same harm. The other path requires imagination, not nostalgia, not protest alone, but intentional design. This is where the old word breaks down, because ghetto was never just a description. It was a containment label, a way to describe people after systems failed them. And if we are serious about the future, that word has to end. So we are naming something new. We call it the Ancestral Commons. Not a place of containment, but a space of cultivation. Not a zone of survival, but a system of shared power. Not neglected land, but inherited responsibility. The Ancestral Commons is what happens when community is treated as infrastructure, when culture is protected, when housing is dignified, when technology serves people instead of replacing them, when imagination is organized. This is where the house of asseveration comes in. We are not here to romanticize the past or profit from pain. We are here to build forward, to identify new technologies, new models, and new ideas rooted in ancestral wisdom, but designed for the future. That's what the Imagine campaign is about. Imagining cities without displacement, imagining economies without exploitation, imagining culture without extraction, imagining futures where people don't have to survive systems that were never built for them. We are documenting, we are designing, we are experimenting, and we are inviting others into the work. This is not content for consumption. This is an invitation to participation. If this series spoke to you, share it. If you see yourself in this history, follow us. If you want to help build what comes next, stay close. Because the era of the ghetto is over. What comes next is intentional. What comes next is collective. What comes next is the Ancestral Commons. And this is only the beginning.